All right, good morning, party people, and welcome back. Well, it's been like an hour, a month. I was going to say an hour. It's been like a month since I've done one of these. I saw Andy Leonard in. Good morning, sir. Been like a month since I've done one of these. G Surgeon from the Netherlands. Good to see you as well. And I fully expect something in terms of technology to completely explode this morning. Because when I went off to Mexico for like 3 weeks on vacation, and when I came back, I was like, okay, I got a laundry list of things I want to do to the computer that I've been putting off for the longest time, including upgrading to Apple's Big Sur, the latest operating system that they have. And ever since I started touching this computer, everything's gone to heck in a handbasket. I mean, it's just like been brutally awful. So it'll be amazing if any of this stuff actually works successfully. I know we tried last week and we had a little glitch in the audio. I think I've got that worked out. We'll see how that actually goes. Happy New Year. Yes, Happy New Year to everyone. I'm sure things will be much better in 2021. Yeah, SQL Nikon raises something that I want to start by talking about. So there's a very good friend of mine, Gareth Swanapool, who I first met about 15 years ago in Miami, Florida. Gareth came to work for the company that I was at, and I was part of the team that interviewed him when he first came on board. And I actually said we shouldn't hire him. Said, I don't think he's a good hire. I don't think he's a good fit for the team. And fortunately, I was overruled. My boss decided to hire him anyway, and over the next couple of years, I got to know him as one of the most incredibly upbeat and interested people I will ever meet. When I say interested, Gareth would want to know whatever you're interested in. He would ask about your interests. He would be completely focused on what you were talking about. His mind wasn't somewhere else. He was listening to you. And he would get excited. If you knew Gareth, one of the words that you would hear out of his mouth all the time was, yeah. You know, he would want to know more about it, and he would get genuinely excited. He would get physically excited. You would be talking to him, and you could see him, clap his hands and get ready and would do things. You couldn't be around Gareth and be bummed out. It just didn't work that way. He was so upbeat and energetic. When I left Southern Wine and Spirits, he took my job. Basically, I trained him on databases, and he ended up doing database administration. He took over managing the SAN, working with the business intelligence team. He went on from there to Pragmatic Works, and then ended up working for Microsoft. He was a just brilliant person that I was honored to know. He was very involved in his community. He had 2 lovely kids. His first wife was just an absolute sweetheart, Jen, and then he recently got married again, very recently got married again. He was athletic. He would go running 5Ks with you. He was just all about the community and being around other people. Well, it was funny when he first came to work for us. When I put in his name in the web, and I pulled up search engine results, and it was him doing Civil War reenactments. He had big long guns and all that kind of thing, and he was amazing. Like, I wanted to know everything about the Civil War reenactments, and it sounded incredibly fun. Gathering together with people around a campfire, sharing stories, sleeping in tents and whatnot. It was very interesting. Unfortunately, we lost Gareth yesterday due to complications from COVID-19. So Gareth has been battling that over the last few days, and things had been looking better, and ended up losing him. He's a dear friend of mine, and I've known him for so long. It's tough knowing that he's gone. But one of the cool things about Gareth was he was so interested. He was so focused on other people and what they were interested in. And that makes me, as just as it did everyone around him, I'm sure, it makes me want to be a better person, a better Christian, more interested in others, and more interested in seeing other people succeed. So I'm really interested to see how the community reacts and see how everyone turns things up a notch and continues to replace the incredibly bright light that we lost, because he was truly a wonderful individual. Now, there's no easy segue between that and open questions and answers. There's no easy anything these days. Man, life just kind of sucks over the last like 8, 9, 10 months. But having said that, now we'll switch over and take your questions because I thought about this a lot last night. I was like, okay, so what would Gareth want me to do? Would he want me to even do one of these at all? Would he even want me to mention it? And I thought, thanks, Peter, I appreciate it. I thought, well, what he would want me to do is he would want me to acknowledge it and then continue doing what we all do in terms of helping other people. So, having said that, I will go ahead and answer your questions. Now, for your questions, the way that the questions work is you read the instructions up there at the top of the screen. You put your questions in there. They show up here on my browser, and you can upvote and downvote other people's questions. I won't get to all of the questions today. I'm out of caffeine. I mean, like literally, we don't have any coffee left in the house. All I have left is decaf. So you see me drinking this as like some kind of placebo. What are you talking about between Gareth and me like having only decaf coffee? I'm like not ready for today in any way, shape, or form. Between that and the technology problems, holy smokes. But yeah, so anyway, I don't know. I'll probably only do this for like an hour. And I'll go through the highest voted questions, and then after that, I'll do a break whenever we go when the sun comes up, and I'll go downstairs and get coffee. My normal coffee place is now opening at 7 a.m., which is kind of awesome. The kitchen doesn't open. I can't get my lox and bagel until 8, but they asked us switch to whiskey maybe. My wife and I drank a lot of tequila last night. We emptied one tequila bottle already last night. John Frio, I know that, and I'm out. I drank that yesterday afternoon. We emptied out all our Diet Coke. So, oh, and Mark says, didn't you move yet? No, we're still waiting on our visa to get into Iceland. You need a special teleworker visa to get in right now. They don't let Americans in they don't let anybody in due to the COVID-19 stuff. So I'm waiting on that. It's literally like the instant that we get approval for it, we call movers, pack all our stuff up, and we're gone. But it's going to be a little while. Daniel, I actually started. I got Apple Fitness. I got the Apple Fitness Plus, and because I'm like, okay, if I'm going to be in Iceland, I want something that I can do in front of an iPad or in front of a TV without any equipment. And so I just started. This week was my first week doing core and yoga. Oh, man, I'm out of shape, but it is what it is. All right, so let's see here. The first question that we have in here, Peter says, let's see here. Did that actually work? Oh, I clicked the wrong button. That's how old I am. I'm so out of shape with this. Was a play on your whiskey and yoga t-shirt. That's true. Now let's see why let's see why the thing isn't showing on screen. Let me see if I can fix that. Let's try that and see if it shows on screen. There it goes. All right, cool, perfect. Silesh, make sure you read the instructions up on the top of the page. If you're not smart enough to read those instructions, I kind of can't help you at all. Up at the top of the page, we have Peter says, hi, Brent, what's your general opinion on cloud certifications? I think for all certifications these days in terms of tech certifications, the certs don't keep up with the technology themselves. The certs are more of a marketing material that you can use to help market yourself. If you use them to gauge the knowledge that you have, they're not particularly relevant. Because after all, think about it. If a product is going to come out, then they're going to write the certifications. They're always going to be like 6 to 12 months behind. Plus, they may not actually measure what people are doing with the technology. They're kind of measuring what the marketing company wants you to know. So I agree with you in that I don't really find any usefulness in certifications in terms of knowledge gauging, but it can be useful if you need to get past a hurdle with a recruiter. Next up, Jesus asks, what's the best way to concatenate columns in different rows using a specific order? I've tried the XML way, but I'm not getting good performance. I actually don't know that off the top of my head. I would post that over at stackoverflow.com and be as specific as you can with what not good performance means, because the XML performance actually works pretty well for me. Next up, Stuart says, a recent pen test triggered, he means like penetration test. Penetration test triggered some alerts I've configured, one of which was for connection attempts to the DAC. Oh, I love that you're doing that. Oh, that's kind of awesome. Oh, you're good on you for, oh, you actually deserve a round of applause for that. I am glad that you're checking to see when people connect to the DAC. Good on you. That's great. What's your view about always having an SSMS connection connected to the DAC to prevent any malicious connections? No, that's a bad idea because see, when the pen test tries to connect to the DAC, they're going to fail because they don't have the login and password. So it's okay if they're trying to get in, they're going to immediately be refused. When you go to connect in, you'll be allowed. So I love how proactive you're getting, but no, don't get quite that proactive. Don't leave something open to the DAC because the classic problem is that you're going to need to access the DAC, and then that SSMS connection will be held by somebody else, and you can't close it. Like I've seen someone have a remote desktop session into the DAC, and then they lost their remote desktop, and we needed to keep troubleshooting, but they couldn't get to their RDP, and the DAC was hosed up, so neato. Tom Can says, what was the worst practice you've ever seen during your SQL Server deployments? So I could go on for days on that, but I'm going to give you one story. I'm going to give you a story from my consulting days. As a consultant, you have to learn to keep the poker face. You have to be very, kind of impartial and chillaxed and not tell anybody that they're doing one of the dumbest things you've ever seen. So I'm sitting in a room, in a conference room. Back in the good old days when we could travel around to places. I'm sitting in a conference room with a whole bunch of people around the table, and the SQL server's up on the screen, and we're talking about what's going on with it. And so I said, okay, let's go ahead and get started. And we turn to the screen, and a little warning pops up on the bottom, and I notice the DBA, because I don't usually drive the desktop. I can, but I don't usually want to. I notice the DBA immediately closes the little warning down in the tray. And I'm like, what was that? And I knew what it was, but I just had to keep the poker face on because there are a lot of warnings that pop up on the tray when you're remote desktoped into a server. I said, oh, what was that? And he's like, oh, it's a disk space warning. I said, oh, okay, cool. Keeping the poker face. That you seem to move pretty quick at closing that. I said, has that been happening for a while and you've just been accustomed to closing it? And he said, yeah. I said, how long has it been happening? He said, about 2-3 weeks. The C drive on the SQL server was full, and they had been ignoring it for like 2-3 weeks. So I'm like, doing the gentle consulting thing. Oh, okay, so what do you suppose is going to happen when that fills up? Is that going to affect uptime? They're like, oh, we're not worried about it as long as the SQL Server service keeps running. So sometimes there are times when you're working with clients and you can tell right away in the first couple of minutes, whether you're facing the world's hardest problems or whether you're going to help somebody get their pants on. And that was one of those days where I'm like, okay, today we're going to be getting our pants on and we're going to be having a nice, upbeat, kind of relaxing sessions. Whew. And sure enough, the SQL Server service went down as we were talking. So I'm like, okay, so let's talk through how we're going to fix this. And unbelievable. Dami asks, how many open connections to the databases are okay and what is too much? Some range of what's usual in your experience. Usually if you have like 2,000-3,000 open connections to a SQL server, that's probably a problem. It's not necessarily going to kill the SQL server, but I start asking questions about, hey, do we have connection pooling? And is the connection pooling working the way that we expected it to work? For example, there was one client that I was at where every client had their own database, and the connection pooling was set up in a way that every connection pool was also hard-coded to a specific database. So as soon as they had like 10, 20 application servers, they were exhausting all SQL Server's open connections. So when you get up in the couple of thousand range, I'd start asking questions about connection pooling. Next up, Johannes asks, hi, Brent, do you have any hot tips on, oh, Busty Boss, good to see you. Hey, welcome back. Good to see you. I mean, welcome back to me. You've been here the whole time. On how to troubleshoot queries, we usually get back result in a second or two, but from time to time decide to take minutes. The phenomenon that you're talking about is usually, not always, but usually parameter sniffing. If you search for SQL Server parameter sniffing, I've got whole classes on it. You don't have to take the classes though. You can just get started with reading the information that's out there online. The key is knowing that term. As soon as you know parameter sniffing, that's going to open up all kinds of doors and articles to you. There are other things that can cause it, like blocking or running out of available worker threads or running out of available memory. But most of the time, if I had to guess, it's like 9 times out of 10 at least, it's parameter sniffing. Next, in terms of do I have hot tips? Absolutely. I have a whole class on how to do it. If you search for Brent Ozar parameter sniffing, I have a whole entire training class, a 1-day fundamentals class, and then a 3-day mastering class on how you go about tuning that. Next up, Leo says, how do you get the actual full results of a large 4 JSON query in SSMS? So I don't do that kind of thing. I would be like, if you need to get JSON out in a regular basis, wrapped in the server. Oh, there's a good joke there somewhere. Then I would do it from an application server rather than SSMS. SSMS sucks at rendering large result sets. I love SSMS. SQL Server Management Studio is great. It just isn't very good at digesting large result sets. If you want to, though, for XML, you can do under Tools Options in SQL Server Management Studio, there's a max XML size. I don't think that relates to the JSON size, but what you could do is take the results of the JSON query and dump them out to XML. Just cast them as an XML query. Thank you, Sajith. I love it. I'm excited. I've recently got my second dream car. For the last couple of year or two, I've had a Porsche 911, and my wife just recently got me a Jaguar XKRS, which I've wanted for like a decade now. So excited with that. Next up, Teja says, how come certain queries will perform better with MaxStop 1? Oh, that's so funny. See, I knew early on that we were going to have a technical problem inside here. I've been troubleshooting that. My audio device just randomly blows chunks out of nowhere and stops sending audio. And I'm like, I have no idea why on earth that is, but whatever, it is what it is. Okay. So next up, we have Tejas says, how come certain queries will perform better with MaxStop set to 1 and not perform well with MaxStop being more than 1? I actually have a whole module on this in my mastering server tuning class. And man, I wish I could boil it down for you into a really short answer. What I am going to point you towards is a handling parallelism. Okay, there that goes. So now, given that it's happening that quickly, I wouldn't be surprised if we had problems with that again throughout. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep an eye on it. If this happens like 2 or 3 more times, we'll call the webcast to quit, and I'll go in, and I don't think I have another audio. I do have another audio interface I can use. The audio is change ports. Yeah, no, it's not quite that simple. So I do have another audio interface I could use. Not really nearby, but well, we'll see how it goes. So if you Google for Adam Mechanic manhandling parallelism, this is a session that he did at a conference that you can go watch. This is not an introductory level session by any means, and this is really targeted at just answering your question. It's targeted at a whole lot more than that. But because you've been around for a while, Tejas, you're going to recognize, oh, it doesn't have the QA thing. Oh, I need to put PolGab up on the screen. Because you've been around in the webcast for a while, you're at the right level where you're going to benefit from watching that. So that's Adam Mechanic's manhandling parallelism. Let's see what we got next over here. So next up, Zishan says, it's a new year and I've been assigned to split a partition. It's about a 1 terabyte table with 2 billion rows. I've already been asked to provide an environment where I can test. So any test. Tips. So you always want to have a new partition already to go rather than splitting an existing partition. Splitting an existing partition will be painful. I wish I had easy tips, but unfortunately, this is not how that works. You want to always have extra partitions already ready to go there. I'm sorry I don't have better news for you there. A couple folks asked, I think somebody was trying to ask a question multiple times there. What are tools can I use to troubleshoot SSIS error messages? I don't actually do SSIS at all. The person I would check with is Andy Leonard. He may still be in here, and he may be able to answer that over in in the chat area over there, and it'll pop up automatically on screen if you see it. So his name is Andy Leonard. He is here, he says. So the other thing that you can do is you can ask him on his Twitch channel, because sometimes he streams as well. So if you go to Twitch and search for Andy Leonard, he does SSIS, Azure Data Factory, BIML, and he'll have much better answers than I would have. So very cool. Interesting. ETW asks, what is the best way to find why my write and read times are slow? Oh, good, Andy. So I'm only going to stop at 7 a.m. It's like 10 a.m. your time, I think. So I'm only going to go for another 40 minutes, and then I'll read your channel after that if you want. If you want to get set up at 5 till, and then I'll go yours. I got to look at how the instructions on how that work. I don't completely remember. ETW says, what is the best way to find why my write and read times are very slow? I've looked at my indexes, but I feel like it may be in regards to disk. Oh, sure. So I'll show you how to go get started with that. So in SQL Server Management Studio, run the command sp blitz first since startup equals 1. So first is part of my open source first responder kit, and what that'll do is it'll give you your wait stats since startup. This top section here, obviously I can't explain how the whole entire thing works, but I'm going to explain to you the part that you're going to need to know whether storage is the problem. So up in here, it gives you your top wait types, and if your top types are page IO latch, that means reading data from data files. If it's write log, that means writing transaction log changes to disk. So if one of those two things or both, that's a good way to get started understanding if it's a disk problem. The thing to do is go Google for Brent Ozar 3 ways to prove storage is slow. I have a webcast that I'm doing with Pure Storage in I'm totally going to go get my other microphone while I'm talking about this. So I'm doing this webcast on Tuesday with Pure Storage. Pure Storage, we're doing 3 ways to prove that your storage is slow, and I'm going to have an hour just talking about all the different ways that you can go about doing that. So Google for Brent Ozar 3 ways to prove your storage is slow. If you can't be there live, that's okay. Pure's going to record, and they'll send it to everyone who registered for the webcast. Now look, I'm about to switch to the same kind of headset that your coworkers use when you're on Zoom calls. I know the audio is going to suck. I know you're going to be disappointed. So now, this is because I swear to God, every time I'm on YouTube and somebody's like, your audio is terrible, whenever I do stuff like this. And I'm like, I know. Well, this thing costs $1,000, plus there's another $500 underneath this audio interface thing that's wigging out every 30 seconds. So I'm going to switch to this just so that it's reliable. I'm so tempted not to do it. Well, we'll do this. I'll plug it in, and then the next time that the audio blows chunks, I'll switch over to it. Let's plug this little fella in. And I know it's going to suck. Y'all are going to go crazy with that when I plug it in. Where do you connect this? I want to connect it to a Mac. I blew away my Mac when I came back from vacation and reinstalled the whole thing from scratch. And it's been, geez, there's this last chance for the mic. what we got next. Next up, we have Dave says, "Morning, Brent. I have a DB telling me that we need to split our 600." Woo! Okay, so there are some times where I can't keep the consultant poker face. Where some things, when I see the consulting poker face, I'm like, so I have a junior DBA telling me we need to split our 600 megabyte database into 4 files because there are 4 processors on the server. No, you do not. I don't know where he got that. Have him or her go give you the evidence where they got that, because that is simply flat out and completely wrong. So the times this isn't Bluetooth, Santa. Thank you, though. Bluetooth, though. There are times when you need to split out databases into multiple files, and it really boils down to a couple of different things. One is TempDB for internal infrastructure limitations in terms of the way that SQL Server balances load across multiple files. The other one is for storage throughput. If you have a large enough database, you may need enough throughput that you need to, for example, stripe it across multiple virtual chapters inside of VM. But at 600 megabytes, you could run that on a phone. You certainly don't need 4 processors for something like that even. But that, God bless them, it's that the junior DBA knows at least something about that. But then just have them than that and say, the evidence, and then that may be, well, I always heard it that way. Well, go show me where you heard it from, and let's talk through that, because they probably are looking at. Next up, Drug says, do you have any special recommendations for servers having 1.5 terabytes of RAM? Have you experienced issues? Yeah, that's not even close to true. I mean, there are parts of that are true, but that's not at a 600 megabyte database. It just totally doesn't matter. Have you experienced issues with the size of memory, lock pages, and continuous memory trace? I don't know what you mean by continuous memory trace. Like, that scares the hell out of me.
Ten, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Here comes the terrible audio. I'm taking off my jacket to fight with the mic. All right, so now I know this audio is going to be nowhere near as close as, but the audio is way better now. So we'll see. And of course, this is, it is what it is. This t-shirt comes to me thanks to Kelly, one of our regular viewers, who works for the California Academy of Sciences, who sent me the shirt. I appreciate it. Okay, so in terms of the 1.5 terabytes of memory, what do you have to do? Audio quality on YouTube is very different. In terms of the 1.5 terabytes of memory, what do you have to do in order to work around it? You shouldn't have to do anything other than, in some cases, you may want to turn on large pages. But what I'd say is, tell me about the problems that you're having that you need to solve, rather than just, I have 1.5 terabytes of memory. I am actually not a fan of lock pages in memory. The reason for lock pages in memory is when you have multiple services that are fighting over the same RAM. If you got 1.5 terabytes of RAM, odds are nobody else is installed on that server. It's just SQL Server and nothing else. So I don't know that I would really go playing around with that. But if you're having specific problems, though, follow up. I wouldn't make any configuration changes just based on the fact that you have 1.5 terabytes of RAM. Next up, Benjamin asks, do you have any tips on how to convince an employer to purchase training that they may view as extra or unnecessary? So I'm very political. I love these kinds of political challenges. And so when I was in that kind of situation with clients, because I'm not in that kind of situation from a career, but with clients, here's what I'll say is, that training costs $500, let's just say. What do your staff cost per day?
Like, just give me a number, and I don't even need to know what it is, but you can calculate out a number pretty quickly to understand what people cost per day. Will it save them like 2 or 3 days through the course of the year? Will they be able to chop off 2 or 3 days worth of their work inside the course of the year? If they can, then it's good training. If they wouldn't, it's probably not a good deal. So sometimes people will just want training for their own personal benefit or because they're curious. They're like, I would like to know more about gee whiz bangs bearings. I'm like, is that actually going to make a difference in the quality of your work? Like, save you actual time? If it's just I would feel better about my job, you're probably not going to get the training. Your job as someone who wants that money is you got to prove that there's a return on the investment. Show how it's going to save you time, and then that's going to open up the doors for management. And then sometimes companies don't. Some companies just prefer to spend money on certain things. I kind of think of it as some companies love to spend money on hardware. Some companies love to spend money on consulting. Some love to spend money on employees. Yeah, I love that line too. Um, and sometimes I'll work with companies and they're like, they love buying all kinds of employees and training, but all the computers there are like Commodore 64s. I mean, they're ancient, decrepit crap. On the other hand, I've got some clients where they have all kinds of the latest and greatest hardware, just like amazing, awesome servers, 80 to 128 cores of CPU power, 1, 2, 3 terabytes worth of RAM, but the people have no idea what the holy heck they're doing. So just different companies approach it in different ways. Next up, Michael says, recently you advocated for folks to download the past videos and host them elsewhere. What about IP concerns? No. I don't mean publish them elsewhere. No. Host them for yourself. Download them yourself so that you have access to them. That's what I mean by host them, like host them on your own local file system, as opposed to hoping and praying that PASS is going to keep them online. But definitely no, don't take someone else's knowledge and then go upload that somewhere else online. That's bad. Let's see here. My friend asks, I'm generating 100 random integers and inserting them into one table, making sure that what sometimes takes 15 seconds. This is kind of one of those theoretical. I really honestly don't know without looking more at the system. It could be any number of things. It could be blocking. It could be a crappy table design. It could be checkpoints. It could be an IO stutter. It could be any number of things. Next up, Des says, a friend of mine asks, is it safe to drop an index that has the same amount of reads and writes? I'm not sure what you're asking. I'm not sure what you mean by the same amount of reads and writes. So when you do an insert, update, or delete, and SQL Server has to maintain that index, that's a write. When you do a select or an insert, update, or delete that uses that index to make the query go faster, that's a read. You don't see every time you do a write, that doesn't increment the reads at the same time. I think what you might be thinking is you might be thinking that every time there's a write, you're also going to incur a read. That's not how it works. So what you're seeing there is different numbers. Some queries are using it to go faster, which is what reads are. Some queries are going slower due to the index. That's what the writes are. Next up, Scott says, what is your opinion of SQL Safe Backup from Idera? I don't do backups these days. I haven't been doing production backup work in like 5, 6, 7 years probably. So I don't have any current opinions on anybody's backup software out there. I'll tell you that they're all kind of roughly vaguely the same, like Idera's SQL Safe Backup, Redgate's SQL Backup, Quest's Lightspeed. They're all kind of vaguely the same. It just comes down to what specific features that you want and like what levels of compression you want, what kinds of encryption that you want. Do you want automated log shipping? Do you want backups to Amazon S3 and so forth? But these days in the year 2021, I don't have a negative opinion about any of those. The bugs have kind of been ironed out by now. I have a bigger problems with SQL Server's native backup and restore these days. We had so many bugs over the last couple of years. Nicholas says, after I find the worst query using SP Blitz Cache and tune it, when does it get removed from the plan cache? The next time that it runs. Next time that it runs, SQL Server will be forced to build a new query plan for it, and then that's when it'll go away from the cache. Next up, Dami says, Landmana Lugar is waiting for you on Iceland. I don't even know what that is, so I got to go on Google. Let's go see what that actually is. That is a geothermal oasis found in the remote tundra of the interior Iceland. Oh, is that the? Oh, it's like by the login. That's kind of epic mountains and day hikes. I'm not as much on day hikes. I mean, we do them from time to time, but I'm much more about getting into something like a Land Rover Defender and driving all over the country. But we're totally. That's one of the cool reasons why we want to spend as long as we can in there. We want to go through the highlands and camp inside the highlands and see, because it's just gorgeous. For those of you who haven't seen Iceland or you don't know what some of the gorgeous parts of it are, go to YouTube and search for Iceland Highlands, Highlands 4K. And there are a bunch of people who've taken drones inside there, trips with Land Rovers, stuff like that. It's gorgeous, gorgeous country, but it's utterly empty. Nobody's out and around there. Iceland is about the size of Ohio, but it's only got 350,000 folks in it. So I have this thing, Forrest, I'm with you. I have this thing where I used to bring fancy camera gear around and I gave up because there's so much good stuff on YouTube. I find that when I focus on doing pictures, I lose track of what's actually around me. I pay too much attention to I've been through the ice caves too. I pay too much attention to the camera gear and not attention to what's around me. So these days, I don't even bring cameras. I bring my phone just so that I can shoot something that I can remember for Instagram or for a screensaver. But otherwise, when I'm done with journeys, I go look on YouTube for other people who've taken full-blown drones in there and done beautiful shots. And I'm like, oh, I recognize that area. And it's not when I was there, but it's still just completely gorgeous. Next up, DBA in hiding says, I left my DBA job of 10 years to do ETL and database development work. I want to go back to DBA work. I built my home lab, I have my blog up, but I feel like no one's going to notice. How can I get attention to my full profile and not just the resume with the recent dev experience on top? Oh, that's an interesting question. So the good news is that for single server administration, if you're only managing one server at a time, it hasn't really changed in the last 10 years. You haven't missed anything. But for multi-server administration, the game is totally different now. Everything's all about PowerShell and DBA tools. How can you automate and manage as many servers as at a time from a command line as you possibly can? So what I would say is, if it's less about your home lab, I don't think that that's going to make a difference. I don't think your blog is going to make a difference. If you're going after single server administration jobs, what you probably want to do is just go talk to recruiters, go talk to local companies. You're not going to be able to get enough traction with your blog quickly to get a job. Blogging is much more about getting much more long-term prospects, like a year, 5 years from now down the road. But if you're just now blogging, it's not going to help you quickly enough to take care of you financially. Go start talking to recruiters or whatever. But if you were doing multi-server administration, if you're like, well, yeah, I was backing up with, the GUI and data domains, and we would manage failover clusters through the GUI. I'm like, oh, no, that things have changed a lot. So you just may want to have to feel a little comfortable going into a larger team, like an enterprise kind of thing, but going in as more of a junior and getting up to speed quickly. Just be very open to that things have changed a lot for multi-server management. Next up, Jan says, sometimes SP Blitz Cache won't return an execution plan. It's too big. When I try to retrieve it, I still get null. Is there any other way to get it? Yes, if you Google. So if you Google for SP Blitz Cache, query not returning. Let's see if we can catch it that way. Hey! I have to tell you though, I'm an experienced Google professional. I've been doing Google for a long time, so I know the kinds of words that you put up there in the Google result. Not everyone can do that. Most of you in the audience cannot do that apparently. That's okay. You're still getting started. So in that case, Jan, if you said you still use it and it still doesn't return null, what you have to do is you have to actually click on it, and then you actually have to read what I wrote. I swear to God, people, why can you not read? It's not that hard. So you read this, then we'll find the answers that you seek. Now, isn't it terrible? It's amazing that people ever show up for this twice, right? Like, it's amazing. People will ask these questions, and yes. So next up, let's see here. Jan says, I just switched to SQL Server 2019, and I'm playing around. Craigie Joe, this without coffee, and yeah, maybe that's why. And I'm playing around with computed columns. What's your opinion on the performance issues? It depends, like just with triggers or functions or stored procedures or anything else. The more code that you put into there, slower performance is going to get. If you do a really simple computed column that only calls system functions, not user-defined functions, but system functions, it can be totally fine. But if you layer in there all kinds of things, like I kid you not, I had a person do a computed column using a user-defined function that called a web service. And I'm like, well, of course that's going to be slow because you're calling a web service on another continent and expecting results to come back quickly. So that's how that goes. Let's see here. Next up, Theo asks, it's true, I do mellow after tequila. As an additional weekly maintenance layer, what would you use for a generic manual stats update trigger? Ola Hollengren's maintenance scripts. Ola Hollengren's maintenance scripts. Don't reinvent the wheel. Ola has a fantastic, phenomenal set of maintenance scripts. They're extremely well documented. So olahollengren.com, ola.hollengren.com. I'll pull it up just so that you can see it. If you go to ola.hollengren.com, this guy has been building these scripts for like the last 10 years. They are kept up to date all the time. He's been doing lots of changes to these things lately. He took a break for like 9 months, but really back up and fired away there. So totally worth it. Next up, let's see here. Next up, Suvrat says, Azure SQL Server Data Warehouse versus Azure SQL DB. When to use what? Any info on pricing? So for pricing, have y'all heard of Google? Is it like, maybe it's only me. Maybe that's my superpower. Maybe it's just that I've actually heard of it. So for pricing information, just go ahead and Google that because that's fairly straightforward. But when do you use what? So for Azure SQL Data Warehouse, you use that when you're building a data warehouse. Azure SQL DB, you do that when you're building a database. Kind of how that works. Think of data warehouse as something that's going to be like a terabyte or larger. You can have regular databases in Azure SQL DB that are like a terabyte or larger. But if you're going to have a terabyte or larger amount of data and you want your reports, think reports are going to scan lots of years of history. You want your reports to finish in say 10, 15, 20 seconds. That's Azure SQL Data Warehouse. If you're running a website where you're doing lots of tiny inserts, updates, and deletes, like a shopping cart or a payroll application, that's more typically used for Azure SQL DB. Let's see here. Gustavo asks, I was planning to buy the senior DBA class and I saw that will no longer be sold. Yeah. Do you have a similar one? No. And I don't intend, so you're absolutely right. I don't intend to launch another one anytime soon because I stopped doing production DBA work. I don't feel like it's right for me to teach something that I don't do. I know there are teachers who do it, and that's totally fair. Like even medical school teachers, you'll see medical school teachers, they're not doing operations in the back room, they're just teaching. But thanks, Pascal, I appreciate it. But I just as a SQL Server professional, I don't feel like it's a good idea for me to teach things I don't actively do. Like a second ago when I said that multi-server administration has changed so much recently, I don't do it. I don't do multi-server administration in the modern way with PowerShell and DBA tools. So I feel like I would be a sham if I tried to teach it. And there are other people who do it and actively teach it too as well. I think all my favorite teachers are people who actually do the thing. When I'd like to sit and attend presentations, it's all people who do the real world type stuff. G-Surgeon, your friend is correct. Conan says, would you consider creating a Pluralsight training video? Let me tell you why you want me to do that, Conan. You want me to do that because Pluralsight is cheap. Now, can you imagine why I would not want to do that? Because I like Porsches and Jaguars, and good things cost money, just like my training. No, but to be serious, it's just the money's not there for Pluralsight trainers. It's okay, it's not bad. But to give you a reference, we sold just over $1 million worth of training in November in our Black Friday sale. You're not doing that on Pluralsight. You're not pulling $1 million down in a month on Pluralsight. So it's just because I like nice things. Also, free T-shirts. Next up, G-Surgeon says, when I run a Blitz first send startup equals 1, I've got a database server that's 7,000 hours of parallelism for 1,000 hours of uptime. Is that a problem? No, I'm with you. I don't think it's a problem either. It just means that queries are going parallel and possibly unbalanced parallelism. But I would look past the parallelism and look at the next set of weights. Because, for example, if you have high CPU weights or high read weights, focus on the queries that are doing a lot of CPU work or a lot of reads. And as you tune those, the need for parallelism will drop and that problem will just kind of fall away. But I'm with you in that 7,000 hours of parallelism and 1,000 hours of uptime just isn't a big deal. Next up, Coyote says, I appreciate how you communicate SQL concepts through analogies. Thank you. Glad you like it. How do you come up with them? Are analogies something you deliberately work on? Yes. When I want to explain a concept, I will, like when I'm going to go lay out a course or a new training class or whatever, I'll lay out the concept that I want to teach, and it usually takes me 2, 3, 4 weeks of thinking about it in the background before I come up with the right analogy. I had a playing cards analogy a while back with statistics. I had an overhead camera view that I shot on YouTube, and I did statistics with playing cards. I was seriously working on that for years. Like for years, I was like, okay, so here's the flow of how it's going to work. Here's when I need to switch to this from the cards to the notepads. Here's the story that I need to tell as it goes along the way. But that kind of thing, the really good analogies take months or years to come up with, and then the easier ones come more quickly. Next up, Teja says, any gotchas on using clustered column store on temp tables? Oh, I've used them in cases where I wanted a CCI to replace 2 to 3 covering indexes, in my case, several million rows and no updates. Oh, man, you got all the, you got all the right background information inside there, inside one thing, just like all the right background information. So you said several million rows, no updates. I love it. You're going on the right exact track. That I was going to say, I would only consider a clustered column store index. Thanks. I appreciate that, Jeffrey. I would only consider a clustered column store index on a temp table if it was millions of rows, if it had no updates whatsoever or deletes, everything's just inserted in one fell pass, and then you refer to that several times throughout the query in different ways. That sounds like a great use case for that. So are there gotchas with this? Yes. If you turn on in 2019 the new in-memory OLTP optimized tempdb, they call it like in-memory or memory optimized tempdb. If I remember right, you can't use clustered column store indexes on temp tables in that scenario. So as long as you're not on 2019 and the code or client doesn't expect to go to 2019 anytime soon, then you're good. Next up, Andy says, maybe a dumb question. Why are folks pronouncing JSON differently? Please enlighten me. There's a really good line, and I'm not going to deliver it really well. But you know how people sometimes pronounce words wildly incorrectly? I'll give you a great example from my sister. My sister, at one point, she and I met in person. and she was talking about blogs, and she said blog. I was like, what? She said blog. I was like, oh, it's just pronounced blog. And she felt really stupid. And I was like, I can see why that would sound stupid, but that means that you learned it in isolation by reading, and that's awesome. Like, we should all applaud when people learn things by reading by themselves. That's amazing. That's so good. So the pronunciation thing, just means when you pronounce it correctly, that just means that you've been around other people correctly. What the hell does that even mean anyway? That you've been around other people who pronounced it a particular way and drove you down that thing. So I saw, yes, G-Surgeon, right? So every time that I saw Jason along the way, I always said JSON. For years, I said JSON. And then I was at like a development conference somewhere, and I heard all the presenters saying JSON, and I'm like, oh, I got to break that habit because I've been saying JSON for forever. I don't know if like what the right pronunciation is of it, and you'll even hear me go back and forth from time to time. When I look at it there on the screen, I think JSON, but so I'm trying to switch it over to JSON. So there you go. Watch me switch it, and it'll be incorrect. Corey says, I have a table with 25 indexes and a massive amount of columns. Never say massive, large, anything like that. Always use numbers, because what seems massive to you may not be massive to somebody else. It's a central table in a database. How do I approach tuning this? Dropping all indexes and see who complains, or is there a script to understand which indexes to put back in? So yes, and I teach it in one of my classes. I teach it in mastering index tuning, but I'm going to give you a short rundown. So the short rundown, if I come out here, is what I call my death method, which is kind of inappropriate given today. But dedupe and eliminate or we'll just say dedupe existing indexes, eliminate unused indexes, add missing indexes, tune indexes for specific queries. Heaps usually need clustered indexes. So the way that I do this is the D and E parts I'll usually do in one pass. I'll just go through, look for indexes that are either unused or highly similar. The tool that you use for that is SP Blitz Index. Table name equals my table, whatever your table's name is. That'll give you a one table level zoomed in piece that kind of just gives you granular information about one specific table. That's where I do my deduping and eliminating. Then for adding missing indexes, I'll do that same thing. I'll do that same SP Blitz Index table name equals my table, but I'm looking at the second result set. This up here is look at first result set, existing indexes, and then this one is missing indexes. So here, this gives you just a rough, quick idea of that work, so you can take a screenshot of that. I cover this in total detail over in my mastering index tuning class. It's like 3 days long and goes into the mechanics of how I do all that stuff. All right, let's see here. Come back over here and look at the last couple of questions that we take. Let's see here. Come back over here. And so Tanya asks, where's it coming up? Oh, I'm tuning queries and the reported time have been reduced. Logical reads are down. The time it takes to run the new query compared to the original in Management Studio is the same. What usually causes this is queries that return a large amount of results, queries that return thousands of rows and columns that are large like XML and varchar max, and the time that it's taking SQL Server to digest the results is what's taking forever. So one trick that you can use, rather than digesting the results into SSMS, whatever the output is, dump it into a temp table instead. And then that way you're just eliminating the cost of SSMS digesting those results. Let's see here. Next up, Teja Reb says, Do you have any thoughts on a Microsoft's modern data platform? My new role says this, but I've mainly worked on SQL Server and SSIS and Azure Data Factory. Microsoft has, this is how I get myself into trouble. Microsoft has a really bad problem with naming things. They keep changing the names on stuff like continuously. Azure Data Warehouse, Azure SQL Data Warehouse, Azure Parallel Data Warehouse, Azure Synapse Analytics. There have been like half a dozen names for exactly the same product. They just keep chopping it up every couple of years. So at some point they got tired of trying to mix in and out all these damn different product names. And so they said, you know what, we're just going to lump it all under the modern data platform, which I always thought is kind of stupid because what was Microsoft's legacy data platform? Was that different? Oh no, it's the same stuff. You're just deciding to call it modern. Okay. You know, it's kind of how like when you were young and you didn't know better about version control, you said things like PowerPoint underscore final, PowerPoint underscore final v2, PowerPoint underscore, no, seriously, this is the last one. It just doesn't make sense. It's just kind of ridiculous. Next up, IU says how to make a login DB. I'm not sure what you mean by that. You may want to be more specific, so can't quite tell there. Dinesh says, can you please share a real-time example for using merge replication? Yeah, I'll do this as the last question. So it has to do with when Gareth and I worked together, actually. When Gareth Swanepoel and I worked back at Southern Wine and Spirits, we had thousands of salespeople all over the United States. And they all had laptops. They all had laptops where they would enter in their sales, record new sales for clients. And the laptops were usually disconnected because they would be out in the middle of nowhere with bad cell coverage. And we had to be able to still record sales on their laptop. But then when they got into a cell coverage area or when they got back home and they connected to their Wi-Fi, then they wanted to upload their data. Well, all the salespeople had little SQL servers on their laptops, and we needed to merge all of that data back together to record sales, to deal with conflicts, because inevitably you'd oversell something of liquor, and so you wanted to make sure that whoever placed the order first actually got it, or if there was a preferred customer who had higher rights. So that's the kind of thing that you can do with merge replication. We didn't actually use SQL Server's merge replication. We used rolled our own replication. I say it was done before I was there. But that's the kind of challenge that you run into that merge replication can solve. Another customer that I worked on was oil rigs. So every oil rig had its own SQL server. Oil rigs are scattered out all over the ocean. And you don't always have good working, reliable internet connectivity, but the oil rig has to keep right on going. They have to be able to keep doing whatever jobs that they're doing out on the oil rig. And then whenever the connection comes back up, then you can merge everyone's data back together and deal with the conflicts. So there you go. All right, so that is all the questions for today. I'm now going to switch over to Andy Leonard's channel. I'm going to pass y'all over to Andy Leonard's channel and have you start rating that. Let me make sure that I have that configured correctly. So let's go /raid Andy Leonard and go see if that actually works. All right, so I will see y'all over in Andy Leonard's channel. Thanks for hanging out with me this morning, and adios. Wear your masks. Wear your masks, people. Adios. Let's see here.